Hello, everybody. Here we are on a bright sunny day, and this is edition 152 of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest with us, Shaheen Myers. Hello, Shaheen.
Hi, hi Frank.
Hi. Yeah, we'll get Shaheen to introduce herself in a minute. But Stan, we always kick off with, how are you this morning?
A bit up and down because I'm full of a cold that I can't seem to shake off. But it's my birthday, so I've got to be happy. And
Birthday edition.
I've had breakfast with my grandson's family, and then dashed back here to do this.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah. Well, it's quite special, isn't it? No, was your grandson with you this time last year?
Oh, it's actually the anniversary of the date we were told it might happen.
Right.
So
So,
the first time we knew, just to explain, it's an adoption. So exactly 12 months ago today, we were told that they could start the process, and there was this child that we could they could
they
adopt.
could. Yeah.
It's been a long time, and it's been a long journey, and not at all an easy journey for them, but it's fantastic. And there's nothing better than he stayed with us the other week. It's the best alarm clock, even if it is 5:30 in the morning. A smiling child over a cot.
I feel for you, Stan. I have the same with my grandson. It's a 6 o'clock start, regardless of the time of bedtime. So
Yeah.
Anyway, Shaheen, thank you for joining us.
Very well.
Do you want to just introduce yourself and just give us a little summary of your career so far and the work you're doing at the moment?
Of course, yes, that's fine. Just want to say happy birthday to Stan. I'm very honoured that you left your birthday breakfast to come and chat. So yes, I'm Shaheen Myers. I've been in the education system now for over 20 years. Started off as a teacher in a very, very large special measures school. So it was a four entry junior school when I first started. Quite a lot of us in NQTs. So I've been in quite a few maintained schools and worked my way up, but solidly based myself into teaching and learning, really, to really hone in that skill and craft before I took on leadership posts. And I went on to lead in schools, so lead key stages and these subjects, as many teachers do. And then I became an assistant head, and then moved on to head of school at Cub Academies Trust. And it kind of really grew from there in terms of the leadership exposure and experience. And then worked in a central team for the large MAT, working, supporting head teachers, delivering on some MPQs, supporting ECTs on their journey, delivering some training across the trust. And then I got the role of deputy director a couple of years ago for Leeds. So it's kind of been quite a steep and quite a quick rise, really, into that. But I think what was great about joining Leeds is that they're very outward facing local authority, and we're very keen to get in that school expertise. And in terms of the relational approach that the council has, I think it's been very, very welcomed by the city that we have somebody who has come from the school system themselves into a role that is overseeing and supporting and serving, really, the education capacity. So I think that's been great. So that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah.
Before I start on a new venture. But
so do we need to say all directors of children's services watch out?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's because I think that one of the things when we worked together for a while, the great thing is being able to go around and visit loads of places, and to sort of see some of the issues that are emerging. I mean, I'm thinking, what was the sort of great, drawing on that, what was the sort of some of the challenges you faced when you took on this sort of senior role in a city, a northern city? I mean, were there some things that caught you out, or bits that you relied on more than you thought you were going to?
I think it's any leadership post, isn't it? It's knowing that you don't know everything, and that you're not the front of all knowledge, and it's the strength of the teams that you have around you. So I'm very fortunate and lucky to have a learning improvement team and an Ascend team, a learning inclusion team, who are in and amongst the city. So really, it's or for me was to do the strategic work. So what I think was challenging was to potentially marry together what we know is happening in the city, so the school-based knowledge and experience that I brought from the sector, to what the local authority processes are, and how can we marry those two together, that actually we do have a fantastic model out there in the city. And whilst there's so many strengths to build on, I think one of the aspects is that each academy, so it's bringing everyone up to speed, that everybody has their own development plan, and the local authority development plan will look very, very different as a result of that. So I think it was bringing everybody to speed and understanding that we're not here, we don't have the levers anymore that we used to have in the local authority to have a level of influence on how people shape their curriculum. Once upon a time, potentially, or results, or it's all of those sort of processes. So it was a steep learning curve, I think, for everybody involved, so that we developed a learning strategy for the city that was very much about the service, very much about the local authority, its delivery to the city, as opposed to, this is the vision for the city, please go out and achieve it in your schools and academies, because they're already doing that work. So what can we do to complement and supplement and probably bolster some of the work going on already? So that I think has been really welcome, but was an initial stumbling block in people's perceptions and understanding of how it all works. So I think it's that bringing together of the system, I suppose, has been challenging, but goodness me, it's an enormous role, but it's very, 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 it's rewarding, but also learnt so much more, because it's safeguarding, it's all social care, and then my son in education will work as a conduit together, and it's the learning has been steep.
Imagine.
Stan, you've just reminded me of something. When I first became an advisor in a large local authority, the head of service was giving a speech, and I was sort of a naive new advisor. And in his speech, he said that the development plan, the authority's development plan, was something that all schools would be looking at to develop their own school development plans. So I laughed because I thought he was having a joke. And the room went quiet, and he said, "What's funny, Stan?" I said, "Well, I thought you were joking. Why would I, as a head of a school that hasn't got an issue with reading, be worried about the local authority?" Just don't connect up.
Yeah.
It's the last thing I would look at before I'd got my school development plan.
One of the things that I think I'm not struggling with it, but I'm sort of aware of the challenge more so now because of some work I've done, is in one of the local authorities I'm working with, there is a very clear sort of industrial regeneration economic plan for the town. And in the town, there are a mixture of multi-academy trusts and maintained schools. But actually, there's a real risk here that if there isn't enough flex in the curriculum delivery, that actually we could end up with all the opportunities that are coming into the town actually not going to the people who live in the town, but those who live outside the town, who'll come up and sweep up some of these sort of great opportunities. So it's sort of, I don't know, the levers that used to be there within the local authority, shall we say, have now sort of disappeared a little bit, perhaps less so in Leeds, where there's lots of maintained schools still. But what I'm looking at is a real sort of patchwork of influence, really, that we've got. It's not a very sort of clear picture as to how do you actually ensure that one multi-academy trust does actually play the game and does actually bend and flex in order to deliver. So I think in terms of leveling up, in terms of how you regenerate and get a better economy coming through from education, I think we've created a little bit of a much more complicated setup, which makes it more difficult to have those sorts of influences. And I think that's why, we'll get onto it in a minute, why Offsted is seen as sort of quite a useful tool, because it's sort of, the government can say, well, I can cut through all of this, just deliver it through an inspection framework.
Yeah, but I think, Frank, I mean, it may have changed in the last 4 years or so, but certainly the DFE didn't understand the levers that were and weren't available, because when I was head of school improvement, I used to get calls from the DFE telling me about complaints that I needed to deal with for academies. And I'd say, no, that's nothing to do with us. That's yours. No, it's in your local authority. Yes, but it's an academy, so it's not our responsibility. And they just didn't get that.
All of these chats, they all remind me of little stories that I've forgotten about, because I remember the Department for Education Department for Education contacting me to say, would I speak to a school? I have no idea who they were, who actually are a cooperative school, nothing to do with the cooperative that I was engaged with, but a school that allegedly had cooperative, and they were having problems with them paying their finances, right? There was a problem. So would I speak directly to the co-op bank about a school somewhere else I'd had no knowledge of at all, nothing about, but could I lean on the cooperative bank to actually do something about it? I'm thinking, what?
Hope you were able to do that.
You have got absolutely no idea that apart from the fact, all this sort of relationship between the cooperative bank, the co-op schools, but you have no idea what you're doing. And I think there is times I've found recently where colleagues, you have contact with colleagues from the department, and actually they have very little knowledge about the areas that they're dealing with, so you keep quiet now, Shaheen. But honestly, it's a real struggle at times, just to cut through all this. But anyway, should we move on? So I'm just about to say
something else that sort of crops up with what Shaheen's been telling us is that induction is really, really important, because I've seen people, very successful heads, be moved into local authorities and not understand how local authorities work, and that then is a car crash. It really is a car crash when you say, for instance, well, what do members, have you informed members? Who?
Yeah.
Do the members know that you are proposing to do this? Well, who are they, and why should? Whoa, let's just roll back a bit from what you're proposing now, and let's just talk you through the systems that you need to go through in the local authority. It's not quite like headship.
No. Well, we're going to get on to Ofsted, I think, because this relates also to not every head teacher makes a very good Ofsted inspector. But it'd be good if there were actually some more head teachers who were good Ofsted inspectors. But anyway, that seems to be in short supply at the moment. But anyway, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it is about Ofsted, but it was a tweet that a head teacher put out saying yesterday schools throughout the country would be celebrating at 12 o'clock when they hadn't had the call, which meant they got through another half term. And it just, it made me think that the pressures that everybody's under in education is not helped by that. But secondly, we've had a couple of schools recently that have had, let's say, unhappy inspections, not disastrous, but not where they could be. And in both cases, I rang the school to make sure the head was okay, because it's not part of the duty, but it's something that I think we should be thinking about. And it struck me that sometime later, when one of the heads was talking to the advisor, that they were in tears, not because they got over the anger of the inspection, but the fact that somebody had bothered to ring them to say, "And are you okay?" And I think it's something that colleagues, maybe other heads, should be thinking about when they're in networks, whether they're in MATs, whether they're in maintained schools, that actually once you've heard somebody's had a rough inspection, just to make sure that they're okay. A phone call just to say, I know you'll be angry, and I know things weren't done properly, but it's not quite the end of the world. Are you okay? And are you okay with yourself?
Yeah,
I think that could make a significant difference. I think
that relates to something,
confidentiality and everything else.
Yeah,
I do think that needs to be thrown away. I think you should be able to say the day after the feedback, yes, this is what's happened.
Well, they say it's a provisional judgment, isn't it? I mean, all of these are
okay. Well, we've had the provisional
by
judgment.
the chief inspector, but it's a provisional judgment at this stage. Yeah, they're worried though.
I think it's how we capture the feedback, really, because I know in inspection you will constantly, and throughout your different interviews, you will ask how things are going. But in terms of some sort of way of generalizing from that, it's just simple comments. Now, I think when we're asking head teachers how they're feeling during the process, how confident they feel to be able to articulate exactly how they are feeling, and how willing are we to listen as inspectors, that there's going to be some head teachers who will be feeling quite anxious about it. And what do we do as a consequence of that? But also, how do we make sure and ensure that after that the inspection's done, on that very last day, when we have the feedback session, that we have some way of having a uniform way of generalising and taking that feedback that has in there that if we're keen on making it more humane, we need to take the feelings into account. So how can we capture that in a way that will allow our head teachers and leaders to feel confident in articulating that without the need or without the feeling that that's going to somehow impact on the outcome, and if it's negative it won't be taken into consideration. So I suppose it's how do we build that. And I know I think just building on something that you said, I've seen a call for an independent review body of complaints for Ofsted.
Yes.
Because actually, how do we I think, Frank, you've said this to me a while ago now, and it's always stuck with me, how you can't quality assure your own work. So how do you quality assure your own complaints when it's internal? So what can we do to ensure that level of accountability and scrutiny is placed in an independent, impartial way that has the best interest of hearts of who the complainants are? And I think that's something that we do need to really consider.
Yeah.
It's worse than that in a way, because you can't see the evidence either.
No.
If you can, and I do know of a school that's in a live complaint situation. The complaint's actually about the conduct of the inspector, but Ofsted have said, well, you can't complain until you've got the report. So we won't read your complaint until we've published the report, and then we'll read your complaint, and that may then affect the final report. Well, why not take the complaint into account now? Stop all that nonsense in between.
It's interesting. I remember many years ago when I first became an HMI, visiting an independent school inspection, and I'm not sure whether this happens now, but the opening section of the report was sort of like a one-pager from the school that just positioned the school in terms of its journey when this inspection took place. And I felt that I didn't read sort of, this inspection report isn't accurate, whatever. It was more focusing on these sort of dips and troughs, and where it was in effect saying it was fortunate last time the inspection took place because we were really on a high, but we've had a few changes of staff, and we're building up again. I would love to see something that allowed schools to position themselves in their cycle of improvement, and clearly state some of the factors that we raised with inspectors, because we knew that these were things that they were going to discover. Last year we lost a head teacher who'd been here 20 years. Well, it's going to take the new head a year or two to to get into the flow of it. But we haven't. We've got a sort of cut and paste, sort of a template that doesn't say anything really.
When we used to do inspect, I know it's a long time ago, it was a different frame and all those excuses, but I felt really important that we got it right. So I used to ask the head, when it had all been done, we'd done the feedback, done the report, I used to say, do you think we got it right? And I can't honestly remember a school where they said, no, you haven't. But, even though you give them really tough messages when you're saying we're putting the school in the category, have we got it right? Well, yeah, you've and that's really important, because if a school says, no, you've actually got it all wrong, I would want to then relook at the whole evidence base before I wrote the report to say, how have we got this wrong, and confirm with myself that we were right.
I think it's a level of consistency in practice that people find difficult, and the phrase in Ofsted is without fear and favour. So when you are inspecting, you park everything that you know at that door and you use that school with an objective sort of view. And I suppose that part of it can be difficult, and that's when people are calling out inconsistencies in practice. But when I think the question that I think we should ask within that, I mean, it's about perspective, isn't it, really? And if it's a rigid framework, we can't be doing the computer says no. We have to have flex in that system. And that was all about your leadership acumen, knowledge, skills, and expertise, and how you draw that in terms of what you're seeing on the day within that school. But the question that I always ask is, can school do any better given the circumstances as it is? Can it do any better? When you can, if you can answer, yeah, actually they can, then you start to sort of form, well, where am I going to go with this? What else do I need to look at? And if they can't, they're doing the best that they can, then actually some of your formulations already happened.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to get that level, I think, of consistency. And I do believe that having serving inspectors is definitely a must. But it goes back to your point.
I mean, serving head teachers as inspectors,
serving head teachers. I do believe that, but I do believe that induction, and I think, Stan, you mentioned that in terms of coming into the local authority, the induction for head teachers into the inspectorate needs to be far more thorough, I would say, just to enable there to be some levelling out of that inconsistent practice. And I'm not saying that that's from head teachers. It's just that we're coming to it from a different perspective. We've not come from the inspectorate itself. We're coming into it.
Something Frank used to do, and I embarrassed him by saying this might be the only thing that ever impressed me with Frank when he was the lead inspector. But he used to ask.
I realised I was coming on here just to be slagged off.
This is a compliment, Frank.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
This is where I thought you.
I'm waiting for the sting in the toe.
Right, there wasn't one, because you used to say at say the either the first or second team meeting, right? Is the school plumbing along doing nothing? Is it plummeting? Or is it on its way up? Wherever it is now, which of those directions is it going? And it made all the team think, well, yeah, actually, we might be saying attainment's not where it is, but this school isn't dipping. It's on the up. So it changed the characteristics of what the team were looking for, because by day 2, you've got an overview of the school. And it was really important that everybody sort of saw the same picture, and once we established what that picture was, it made a difference to how you inspected on the rest of the thing. And I remember Frank being really, really angry about people who didn't get that. And also, when this sounds a bit weird, when you as a team inspector, which I was under Frank a couple of times, are banging on about something that isn't really relevant to this school's position. And he would say, I know that, I get it, you're right, but that's not going in the report, because it won't make a difference to the school, but it might put them off doing what they need to do. So, the key issues are going to be the key issues, not just the things that you've spotted. And that was strong leadership, and also right for the schools. Right, Frank, I'm not complimenting you again now.
I think the thing for me was around, because it gets a bit, in a way, Shaheen, we might get on to what's caught your eye this week in a minute, but because we've got to be careful, we're nearly on 30 minutes already. But the thing is that I think it's this sort of the flow, which we talked before, this idea that improvement, school journeys are a constant line upwards. I think that the most disappointing inspectors are those where they reveal, I think, a lack of understanding about what the journey of leadership and management is they can't accept that things haven't actually worked out as well as everybody wanted. And that wasn't down to factors often that were related to the performance of the senior managers or the governors. This is, circumstances have got in the way of this, and I think the recovery from what the schools did during COVID and all that outreach, and the inspectorate basically pushing it under the carpet as if that had no bearing whatsoever on the life and journeys of these schools, I think was the gravest mistake that the inspectorate has made in the last probably 10 years. Because for me, we should be really embracing that work and saying that's a really good starting point for shaping a different type of educational vision for the country. One which really values educators who do much more than just educate the children. And we completely lost it, and I think that head teachers were right to be up in arms about that. And I think it also reveals the fact that we have an inspectorate where I don't think there are sufficiently positioned, there aren't sufficient recent head teachers positioned in the hierarchy in the inspectorate who could actually lean on that decision, because that was a wrong decision and probably driven by the government also wanting to move on, because they'd at that stage told Sir Kevin Collins that we're not going to invest £15 billion in a recovery plan. All of this is where it's all being played out, and I think we're reaping now the effects of that catastrophic decision that was made.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's been an incredible fallout, and one element of that is the level of faith that the leaders now have in aspects of leadership that they're looking for in terms of guidance and support. And there's certainly, I would say, a disconnect. I don't think we had the necessary risk appetite during COVID, or have looked at post-pandemic recovery in enough detail to think that we need to do things differently, or that we need an injection of funding and support. And that would happen if our risk appetite was so secure and secure enough to know that there's going to be direct correlations between it takes 10 years, when you look at any sort of national disaster, 10 years to come out of that, and we don't have the mechanism or the funds around what will a 10-year recovery look like for us. And so by year 2, it's right, you're out of a pandemic now, post-pandemic recovery, back to normal. Well, what does that look like? And I think in terms of just coming to what's captured my eye is the recruitment and retention. These are the contributing factors to us not retaining our workforce, and we rely on them so heavily. So I think what we've done is there is the goodwill of the education system we have always relied on nationally, and that goodwill is running out. And if we don't help and support it and put that supportive mechanism around it, whether it's Ofsted, DfE, local authority, anybody, we don't put that around it, there's nowhere for our leaders to go. And they then, we have to rethink their choices that they make. And these are fantastically good leaders that we need to retain, and teachers. So I think we do need to do a 360 and audit really what will the profession look like going forward post-pandemic for at least 10 years, and then have a plan accordingly to mitigate against the risk that we are now facing, where we are not able to recruit to head teacher roles, which was seen as so attractive a few years ago, but no longer attractive.
Yeah. But it's funny because the point I wanted to make this year, what's caught my eye, was around how schools are recruiting staff. And I know that there are problems all over the place, with high levels of vacancies, loads of re-adverts going into various newspapers and whatever. But I did some work in one local authority to look, and I looked at every vacancy that exists in that town. And what struck me was how varied the approaches were. Some were really out there. They obviously spent a lot of time thinking about how are we going to attract people to our school. It perhaps doesn't look as attractive, seaside town. We've not got a great Ofsted. All these things made those schools think very carefully about what are we going to say, how are we going to do it. To others who were quite sort of, I don't know, blasé is probably not the word, but they basically put the advert up, linked to a very short job description, and then here's the application form. And it really struck me how varied that was. And in a way, in a market where there are loads of vacancies, you've got to look at being creative and perhaps do things differently. So, I was suggesting things like simple things like the number of schools that are not using the DfE's free vacancy website is staggering. It costs nothing. But so few schools are using it, and so many schools are still using the TES. That for me shows us signals a sort of lack of sort of a reflection really in terms of what's likely to work and what's likely not to work. And my last thing before I finish, I remember somebody said to me when I was in the co-op, there are loads of teachers in Northern Ireland who have been trained who can't find work. So I went over with the head of HR and the comms manager over to Northern Ireland for the day to just talk to teachers. And there are. The one thing that they want to stay in Northern Ireland, they do. And I understand the reasons for that. but actually things like giving them a flight back at Christmas, Easter, and the summer was just beginning to sort of think about how do we get people to come to places which are difficult to recruit to, and other things like giving them loans for, rental loans, because they were coming from, say, Northern Ireland, where housing's relatively, or rentals are relatively cheap, to an area like, say, Manchester. They needed help, but there's just not been that sort of creative thinking around how we recruit, in these places.
I'd say so, Frank, with adverts as well, because you have some innovation, and it's going back quite a few years ago, where somebody started putting, this is what we have to offer. We have children who are keen to, and then everybody took that model, and so every advert for
pasted
with a list of things, excited children, blah 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 blah. And we did some work recently on developing cultures, and we looked at one of my favorite leaders, Shackleton, and his advert for getting people to basically risk death to try and get to the South Pole. And this is his advert as it was written. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honour and recognition in case of success. And he was oversubscribed with people. And we talked about schools, instead of saying this is what we offer, say this is what we believe in. These are our values. This is what we think is important. And if you agree with us, then you're more likely to fit into our culture and help us on our journey wherever the school's going, than if you are just applying for a job. So tell people what you believe in and what's important. And we had one school completely rethink its advert, and at a time when it was hard to recruit people, had a massive intake of obviously applications, simply because it was different and it appealed to people who held their values very close to themselves. So if you see somebody advertising the same values you believe in, it's much more of an attraction to say, I might just have a look at that.
Yeah. Shaheen, you're going to say?
I was just going to add to that, really. I think it's making your adverts as personable as possible, so that you're giving a flavour of who you are, but you also, I think, need to be mindful of who you're trying to attract. So in terms of EDI, what you need to really hone in now is actually, we are welcoming you for who you are into this. And if you can match the values, and these are the values we believe in, this is our vision, and do that in a way that is so inclusive, you're likely to attract that. So we need to say, you're right, the adverts do need to stand out. And I think it's just that personable approach that we can take. And there's some wonderful things now, QR codes that you can add to an application, and that just brings everything else to life now as well. So you don't have to have that big packs or booklets or whatever you have for an advert, just a QR code. And I've seen people do videos of schools as well. So individual schools, if you're an academy trust, you can have a quick tour by a pupil on a video, and I think that's fantastic. But we do need to be innovative.
It's funny, I was at a heads meeting last week, and I said, because we have a guest called Graham Potts, he's I don't remember if you remember Graham, he's the head of Cardinal Newman in Oldham, and he's I think he's Vice Lord Lieutenant for Manchester, I think. But anyway, he has he basically does a daily blog it takes about a minute onto his phone, puts it on the school site, and he has a problem with taxi drivers who park in the car park. So he basically goes out with his phone and says, look, this is what I'm about to face this morning. And he goes like that, and it's that, I for me, I just look at those videos and think, it's not flash, it's just life, isn't it? And he looks a really good bloke. I'd like to work for Graham Potts.
It's reality.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, that's the end of the 152nd edition. But we do normally ask our guests, and I might catch you out here, Shaheen, because we didn't mention this before. Is there one thing that you would perhaps want to change in education?
One thing, Frank, one thing. I've got at least a handful. No, I would say I would I think we do need to think about how we support the mental health and wellbeing of our school staff. I think that it should be mandatory in schools. We have a wealth of support for pupils and children, young people, but what do we actually have that will support and retain a workforce that feels quite depleted at the moment? And how do we have that duty of care? So for me, that would be absolutely mandatory. It would be part of the offer, but so embedded. I think for me, it's national policy. It's simply national policy enough to make sure that it is a given, as the Equality Act is given. Really, then let's make sure that there is an act that actively supports, so that we don't see any repeat of what tragically happened to Perry.
Yeah, I think what we've got to do in that, because I work with schools that have a really good mental health for staff and pupils, but the one person who organises it all, or the top
Yeah.
2 or 3 people who organise it all, nobody looks after their.
Yeah.
And you speak to them and they say, I'm fine, because you can't get under that skin straight away. You have to have a longer conversation and a better relationship before you get under that. But I think that's got to be part of any national scheme. It's going to have to be the governors or the board or the MAT that have to have fairly robust systems for making sure that their school leaders in the senior leadership teams are supported as well. Not seen as their job to support everybody else.
No. Well, I really thank you so much for joining us, Shaheen. It's been a great chat. And actually, it's been an hour chatting, even though it's only 40 minutes of the recording. But it's been a really enjoyable hour. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
And we have another guest joining us next week, and then we have a week off because Frank's off to Ibiza with the family, so we're going to have a week's rest. So anyway, so look forward to seeing everybody next week, and enjoy the bank holiday. The weather looks fine, so hopefully we'll be out and about. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.